When I said to keep expectations low during my live stream, I didn't expect to nail it, because Lando did end up settling, George Russell looked a bit like a fool, and Charles Leclerc, well, he tried. And I'm quite sure that some of you will have opinions about that controversial overtake, but hey, at least it's not Abu Dhabi 2021. But we may as well start off with Lando Norris. He's the champion. Fair play, you did it. I also understand that some folks may not be happy about this, but in the light of the whole of 2025, all three title challengers had their lowest ebb, which did compromise their championship run one way or another. There will be many people out there saying, well, oh, Lando only won it because of Monza, or, oh, Kimi Antonelli having a mistake.
You shut your mouth about that.
But equally, you could then throw into the conversation Max Verstappen's flying off the handle in Spain, Oscar Piastri putting it in the wall at Baku, and then being nowhere for several races. But we also must remember that those two drivers also had their remarkable moments, as did Lando. They all did, but they also had some really bad bits. In the end, he came good at the right time when he absolutely had to, so credit where credit is due there. Because he did manage to fend off the advances of Leclerc and not let the surprise overtake from his teammate around turn 9 fluster him too much into being backed into the Ferrari. Now, of course, I saw during the watch-along of mine that there was a lot of anger regarding Lando not being penalised for going off the track in his trying to overtake of Tsunoda. Yes, he did leave the track, but the stewards did deem it necessary in order to avoid contact with Yuki, and potentially causing a safety car if there was debris on the track. That, according to them, if Tsunoda hadn't resorted to moving more than once, Norris would have probably been able to overtake him without that much drama. And some people might be thinking, well, why didn't he just make it easier for himself and go right instead of left? He was just doing what he was doing in Canada with Piastri again, only this time there was actual runoff instead of a wall. But I do get the sense that this is going to be talked about for quite a while, about the injustices and bias about the stewards, but can you imagine the blowback there would have been if they actually gave him the penalty? I mean, I don't think the FIA could have won in that situation, so I'm just going to shut up about it. And then there'll be people saying that, oh, well, Lando only won it because he backed into third place. He didn't go chasing Max or Oscar like a real champion. Well, may I remind you, quite a few times in our history of Formula One, there have been quite a few moments when champion-elects actually just do what they need to do mathematically in order to do it, instead of going for glory and potentially making a mistake or completely destroying the car. Just don't overextend when you don't have to. His own quotes are quite telling. Pride not in the trophy, but in paying back the people who sacrificed for him. You can argue about who was the outright fastest over the year, but you can't really argue that he didn't earn it at least a little. Who am I kidding? There'll be arguments about this forever, aren't there? But now we'll get back to the losers, our normal programming. And I think we probably knew to. We were all very distracted what was going on the top 5 to notice any of this. So we'll start off with Racing Bulls here. Wait, look, they got 6th in the Constructors. Why are they the losers here? Well, yes, they technically did secure 6th place in the Constructors, which is an achievement in of itself. But when you look at how their race went, it sort of reminds you that some of their weaker tracks where strategy really fell apart and they did sort of limp home, collapsed over the line, whereas Aston Martin just completely were going, come on! I mean, Isaac Hadjar did a great thing in qualifying and getting into Q3, and it looked like he was on course for a points finish, and the initial stint was looking pretty solid. But then once the pit stops came along, it completely undid all of that work and he truly never recovered. You know, the usual thing, he got stuck in traffic, the DRS train, and just a lack of pace on the brand new tyre meant that he fell down the order, and I think he got as low as like P16 or something like that. Liam Lawson's race, this is just like Spain, another tangle with Behrman. And the strategy didn't really do him many favours either. Then that penalty for erratic driving summed up the sense of scrappiness that he had without a reward for it. You're not exactly ending on a high now, are we? Neither he or Isaac. And Permain was right in his words to highlight the season as a whole as a success. Of course, P6, that's not too bad for Faenza, which was once Minardi. And in a year where the midfield battle was really tight, they did finish where they needed to in the table. But the race itself, they'll just be thinking, well, we're glad that's over. And I think Williams will be thinking the same thing as well, because they have the luxury of being 5th place in the Constructors, which for Williams is an absolute remarkably strong achievement. This is something they truly deserve, but this race, like with the Carb, was one to forget. I mean, Carlos Sainz came close to a point, but Alex Albon, oh my god, this final third of the season has been absolutely atrocious. He rolled the dice from the back with a soft tyre start and a 2-stop plan, but despite a good launch, again, he got himself stuck in a DRS train with no tyre advantage in trying to break free of it. Then he got a time penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Nothing really clicked. and I bet he's glad that that particular tool DRS is now history. Carlos Sainz's race was much more solid. He was nursing a one-stop medium to hard plan, which was going to leave him exposed later on, and it kind of shows that maybe the two-stop might have been good if you wanted to rise up the order. And then, of course, again, traffic. There wasn't really much more he could do with then P13 or something like that. I know they probably won't care about this result because they weren't going to lose 5th place. It wasn't in any danger. This will be a car well remembered in this team's history, in that, hey, finally, we're back in the midfield and arguably best of the rest. Their statements say it themselves, that they've got some real big pride for this season and they're looking forward to next year. And we really should be looking forward to next year as well, because they are the bastions of looking forward to the year and sacrificing a season, and maybe the season before that. But yeah, on the night, they were just more passengers on the DRS train. Yay. And then with Alpine, their sticker on their cars said Merci Viry Chatillon. If I were French, I'd be saying, oh, sacre bleu. To think that Renault has been in this sport for nearly 50 years, and I mean, I feel bad for anybody who worked on that 1977 power unit. Pioneers, and then they end with that. And if you wanted to represent the entire season in one race, Abu Dhabi was pretty much it. Both cars at the back of the grid, and they both spend the evening discovering new ways to be slow, even in clear air. And then, hey, Gasly at least finished ahead of Colapinto, but he had another scrap with a 5-second penalty for track limits, and he tangled again with Nico Hülkenberg. That is really not fighting at the sharp end and keeping it clean. It's like banging elbows for the last deck chair at a swimming pool or something like that. It's hardly glamorous and nobody likes seeing it. It makes you out to be a complete and utter prat. And it goes against one of the things that Briatore said. You just don't great to go. You just don't great to go. And that's something you can say about Colapinto. At least he's not crashing the car anymore. But then arguably you'd be saying, well, he's not exactly showing much for it. I think he's very much just wanting to bring it home and not draw any attention to himself. And I must admit, it's a bit of a shame that I've not had a single Franco Colapinto. I mean, Pinto or something. Which one do you like, Pinto or Pointo? But at least the tone from the drivers and the team is brutally honest, that the car was terrible, as was the season. They're desperate to slam the door on this year and focus on what's happening next year with Mercedes power. And seriously, this is not good for Team Enstein's legacy, because I don't think they've ever finished last before, even when they were Toleman. Well, at least when they were actually classified. But one thing I do appreciate about them is that they didn't try and pour sprinkles over this absolute steaming pile of cowpat. But yeah, it's a sad end to Renault's motoring involvement in Formula 1, I'll just say that. And then Kimi Antonelli, he is a winner in some people's minds, in that he was the last person to activate DRS in Formula 1. He'll have that legacy for the rest of his life. And even though he didn't manage to outscore Lewis Hamilton in the end and take P6, at least he can actually say that in the modern scoring era, he completely trounced my boy Oscar Piastri. I mean, and I feel sorry for this kid because he'll most likely be dogged by some parties. I think I've actually seen it start already, that he could be the one responsible for Max losing his 5th world title because of what happened in Qatar. But as I said before, leave the kid alone! Do you see Max Verstappen metaphorically slamming the car door on Kimi's head? No, you don't. You see him being quite consoling and understanding. He was like that in Austria, he was like that in Qatar, he's like that today. So, just follow your role model, people, please. And if you're angry about Norris claiming his 1st world title and you decide to take it out on Kimi, that's completely missing the point and extremely harsh. Because he's still learning in the highest level of single-seater racing, and you've really got to look at his entire season. 150 points is still something to be really, really proud of. And we all thought that he was going to completely and utterly flounder, and that might have been Toto's cue to exit the building. Instead, Toto's going all the way to the bank because he got a really good investment with the kid and for pocketing some of his returns. But his race must have been frustrating because they gambled on a hard tyre start to open up options like they did with Piastri at McLaren, but with traffic, unlike with Oscar. Not able to attack on the straights either, and finishing outside the points was bad on a day when Russell could at least score 10 points for the team to secure 2nd in the Constructors. I still think his rookie campaign has been nothing short of excellent. And then speaking of another rookie campaign that was excellent, Oliver Behrman. But why is he in the losers bracket? Well, you've got to look at the situation that was going on with Behrman, in that he was actually on course for a points finish, the final race of the season, and Haas would have been on for a double points roster. It might not have been enough to surpass Aston Martin in the standings, but it certainly would have been a really good show for both of them, a strong end to 2025. Once again, the stewards slapped him on the wrist. They judged his defensive moves in his battle with Stroll to be more than one change of direction, earning him a time penalty that dropped him out of the points talk for good. And he's back on 10 penalty points as well. Damn it. His frustration afterward felt justified too. He argued he broke the toe once and simply held the inside line, which is exactly the sort of grey area young drivers have to learn that it doesn't really wash well with F1 stewarding. Everything else, though, was perfectly solid. Because if you just took that out of the equation, him being able to rise up from 11th and get into the top 10 would have been a really solid effort. But the one thing he probably can take comfort in is that at the end of the day, in 2025, he managed to outscore Esteban Ocon, the one we all thought was going to be completely sending him to the cleaners, and maybe even getting a cheeky podium for Haas. Well, that didn't happen. Behrman got closer to the podium than Ocon did. Because I can easily imagine that if this were the 2000s, his battling with Stroll would have been seen as perfectly acceptable, wouldn't you agree? And another driver that got dinged for moving around more than one direction was Yuki Tsunoda, and I can't imagine that this was the way he wanted to end his full-time Red Bull racing career before he goes off to do testing duties. What he did was nowhere near as helpful as what Checo did for Max in 2021. Yes, he made it to Q3, and he did help out Max in securing pole, but track limits relegated him to 10th when he could have actually been a few places higher, and maybe troubling the likes of Russell and Leclerc, or maybe Norris if he got a really excellent start. Then he had to end up being the roadblock, because not only did he fail the objective that Red Bull handed him in trying to delay Norris as much as possible to maybe back him into Leclerc, because that's what Norris's race was all about, stopping Charles from overtaking him, but then he got a 5-second time penalty for his trouble, so he couldn't even be on course for scoring a single point. And I think this was a weekend that pretty much summed up his time at Red Bull Racing, that, yeah, he had the potential to do well, but he had to come up with so many things and obstacles in his way, including the team dropping the ball in a moment when they're going through a massive change. Yeah, I don't expect the second seat curse to be nearly as bad as days gone by, but Yuki Tsunoda certainly was yet another major casualty. At least he was determined to fix things, he didn't give up, and he certainly didn't get a visitation from Lady Luck this year at all, except maybe Baku. His comments after the race were mature though, because he went on to praise Lando and Max, and he just reflected on his season. But it still leaves Abu Dhabi as a missed opportunity to go out on a high, especially since it's a track which he actually has done really well at. His best finish in Formula 1 came at this track in 2021, but in 2025, this was a very scruffy way to end things, hopefully at least for now. Then we get to the mess section, and for Bortoleto, close, but no cigar. Seriously, for my other boy right here, this was absolutely gutting to see, especially since he not only got into Q3, he was in P7. He was right behind Fernando, and in the opening stint of the race, he actually was not that far behind his mentor. This was absolutely remarkable to see and was really mature. A hugely impressive recovery after Vegas and Brazil was a really big bum note of the year. But unfortunately, it all started to fall apart when they changed onto the new set of tyres, and he just couldn't quite capture that same magic. And then on top of that, they got porpoising issues, which sent him tumbling down the order, going from as high as 7th to just being outside of the points. It wasn't a total disaster, but he didn't come away with any points, which in a sense is like, oh man. But at least his tone is that not of a man who's angry with himself, but a man who seems like he's actually had a fairly good season. And quite frankly, the amount of points he's been able to score at a team that nobody thought they'd be able to actually see anything impressive of him, he'd be having an absolute field day if he at least scored a point. Having a position as high as 6th, knocking on the door of the top 5 in your rookie year, in a Sauber? I mean, that's an achievement in of itself. He's in there only because he just missed out on getting that point, not because his performance was middling. No, he made the best out of a bad situation, especially after his first stop. Put simply, the strategy let him down, which then caused the car to go up and down. And I think one thing he can be really, really proud of is because if you look at the quali head-to-head, it's a dead heat between he and Nico Hülkenberg. And Nico is a quali merchant. That is really impressive. And what was also not as impressive was George Russell. Oh man, this must have been such a humbling situation. Going from a situation that said, Max, come on, give your buddy a tow, I can help you out in the championship. And then he ends up being over 20 seconds behind Leclerc in 5th place. Absolutely nowhere. He did not figure at all. He had a bad start. He fell behind Charles and Fernando. Oh my God. Oh, I like George, but that was that humble pie must have been massive. Yeah, he was able to get past Fernando eventually, but he did not get past Charles. That was a grind. The W16 really going out on a middling note, and yeah, sure, Russell did do what he needed to do and secure second place in the Constructors for its team, negating Hamilton's march into the top 10 for Ferrari, but this was a rather ho-hum way to go about things. And yeah, after all the hype and amazement that Russell was giving us for this and the entire season, this wasn't the way he hoped to maybe end it and stake his claim for the title next year. And speaking of Hamilton, his night was a really quietly competent recovery job. Starting on those softs meant that he could do a really early undercut, which I, at the time, thought was rather confusing, but fortunately, it put him into a situation where traffic and DRS trains were not nearly as much of a hindrance. He could actually make some progress. And this around Yas Marina, which it can be really, really hard to overtake if it's not that really back straight with a little chicane in the middle. He was actually able to make some good results from where he started near the back. Yes, P8 is not exactly glamorous. This is not nearly as impressive as what Max was able to do from the pit lane to third in Brazil, but it was certainly a fairly decent showing with a car he absolutely loathes and despises, and I'm pretty sure he looks at the W14 these days and thinks, perhaps I was too harsh on you. This has been a bruising first year at Ferrari, and you can feel it in his words, that he's also met a lot of slammed doors properly in his face regarding trying to make changes, but he tries his best to remain magnanimous. He thanks the team and thinks that this year has not been the season anyone wanted. Good drive on the night, but it didn't make me go whoa or flip any narratives regarding him. It was not too bad. Then we'll get to the winners. Yeah, there were winners other than Norris, and we start with Max Verstappen, because if you isolate this circuit from the title story, this was classic Verstappen, because come off it, clean launch, dictates the pace of the race, he has pace in his pocket, he doesn't really have to worry about anyone else behind him. And then, as I saw during the watch-along, the live stream that I did, there were many people ruminating about the idea that he had so much pace going behind him that maybe they could go in for a cheeky pit stop and then try and back everyone into each other and maybe give Leclerc another opportunity to overtake Lando. And in fact, Oscar did ask him about this on the cooldown, and, you know, he thought against it, Max. Like, it was just not worth it. So, for those of you saying that Red Bull were being too weak, well, Max certainly agreed. If he wanted to do it, he would have certainly done it, and they would have followed him without question. And I think it was also a case of Max Verstappen following what he said not that long ago and treating every single race as a singular entity, going one step at a time to try and get Red Bull back to being fighting fit. And you could arguably say that they succeeded. There were rumours saying that Christian Horner wanted to give up on 2025 around about the time of Silverstone before the summer break to focus on the following year. And then Max would have not had any chance of providing this grandstand finish where he got to within 2 points of Lando Norris. He didn't get the 5th world title, but there are still many things he can be proud of. The most amount of pole positions this year, the most amount of wins by any single driver this season, and being able to cut down the gap to the championship leader by triple digits. That is something really, really impressive. That will easily cement him being GOAT status, even though he can't join the likes of Michael Schumacher in having 5 world championships in a row. Does Max care about that stat? No, he probably doesn't. He talks about pride in the turnaround as well in his interviews and about how the team handled the pressure, it resulting in ultimately securing the most amount of victories, and that will be something he'll take gladly. He goes out of his way also to praise Lando's achievement, which he did say last year would come eventually. So this doesn't really sound like a man who's sulking off in the corner about what happened. I am really certain that the vast majority of Verstappen fans will be looking to this and saying, wow, Max, you've completely outdone yourself. You didn't need to win a title. You won so many people's hearts that this time 12 months ago hated your guts. Or at least he's not the villain that people despise. He might be the anti-hero that people swoon over. And like I said with Lando and Monza, people will be asking Max about, oh, if only things happened differently in Spain, what would you think about that? Go and look up that interview because someone actually asked him in the post-race press conference. Max clapped back so well, all it left the journalist doing was having a stupid cheesy grin. Max calling him out about that. Oh, well done, Max. That was a good response. Then there's Oscar Piastri. I know it wasn't enough to see him at least finish second in the championship, which is something Lando said that he would have liked to have seen. But considering the concern many folks had that McLaren would actually interfere with his run plan, they didn't really actually get in the way. And he was able to quietly fire a shot across Lando's bow, because seriously, that overtake around the outside at turn 9 at the start on the slower tyre, that is right up there with his 2 round the outside overtakes on Hamilton this year. It's been absolute gold. And granted, some people may be hurling their phones of doubt at the Australian, saying, oh, well, Lando probably didn't make it that easy for him. But I can't imagine that Norris would have really wanted to be battling Leclerc for a dozen laps, chewing up his tyres, and not having any hope of maybe getting second place on merit, or maybe snatching a sneaky win at the end of it all. He wouldn't want to be fighting a Ferrari, he'd be wanting to fight the Red Bull. And I also don't think that Lando is expecting Oscar to be able to do that on the harder tyre. That is really rare in this era of Pirelli and conservatism. And the one-stop worked fairly decently. He actually was able to pull in some margin toward Verstappen. He had much cleaner air than other people on one-stoppers did in DRS trains, but it ultimately was not enough. But in the bigger picture, this is a statement on how far he has come. He's been able to really impress himself and end the season on a fairly good note, where he was in contention for at least one more victory to bring him into double figures. He's also generous toward Lando in his own comments and talking about pride in the season and focusing on becoming even stronger next year, which I'm pretty sure that he will. I know, he had the title lead for most of this year and he then fell disastrously off, but when you think about it, this season was pretty great, because all the times he classified or he wasn't disqualified, he remained in the top 5, bar his home race in Australia, which, I'm not gonna lie, must have been absolutely gutting for him. Home pain, much like how Brazilians experience home pain as well, it's transferable. But as race weekends go, this was definitely one for the winner bucket, and it was showing that, really, Oscar can be faster than Lando. Then there's Charles Leclerc. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's sick and tired of this year, but from a driver's point of view, this was a very good race for him. Trouncing Russell by miles, almost by a whole pit stop, and immediately locked onto the back of Norris for a good long while, harassing him for lap after lap. Leclerc giving the Tifosi something to actually jump up and down about. But much like is the case for most of this year, the Ferrari simply ran out of puff and the tyres simply just cried no more. Because you've got to admit, he must have been ravishing those tyres. I knew it was going to fall off eventually. And then when it got to like 2, 3, 4 seconds, it was like, yeah, Leclerc, you're done. You had a good try though, but you're done. But at the very least, Leclerc remained in contention somewhat with the front-running 3. He was right up there, having some opportunity being undertaken if there was some chaos above, which sadly there wasn't, or if there was a safety car. And his debrief spark a similar note, that he's glad to see the back of this year and that hopefully next year will be a blank slate, in that maybe he could be in contention for a world championship, or at the very least bag one solitary victory. But I think he can also take comfort in the fact that in his first season with the most decorated Formula 1 driver of all time, he actually held his own very convincingly. But then again, I think Ferrari helped him out in that regard as well, yeah, just being a brick wall toward Lewis. Then there's Aston Martin, and if there was a race that needed to prove to us all that this project actually has some teeth to it, this was it. Because Fernando was absolutely on fire. He was really bringing this team, carrying this team towards surviving in P7 and preventing the indignation on being P8 and arguably considered a backmarker. And I'm pretty sure that Lance is eating a lot of humble pie right now after what that comment he made last year in the middle of it. By saying, oh, well, I'm 4-4 with Fernando, so make of that what you will. Well, this year, it's 0-24 in favour of Fernando, mate, so, yeah, pipe down. His launch was vintage stuff, Alonso's, and he humbled Russell completely. And crucially, the race pace sort of matched the qualifying promise too. Coming away with 6th place, yeah, he couldn't figure against the top 4 teams at the end of the day, but for this AMR 25, which Fernando will be glad to see the back of, this was pretty great. Stroll, meanwhile, played the long game on the hards. Then he used the mediums to carve through the pack, and he did get close to securing a point, but when it came time to dueling with Behrman, things got rather ugly. Because, yeah, Behrman got pinged for a time penalty, but so did Lance for the same penalty. He did ultimately come away with a single point, but just one when it could have easily been 2. All in all, this was a nice little way to end Aston Martin's arc as a customer team. After the Abu Dhabi Young Driver test, they will now metamorphose into a works team. But yeah, the fact is, though, is that in that final race, Alonso completely trounced somebody that is young enough to be his own son. But hey, Fernando's about to become a Dan himself in the not-too-distant future, so I'm looking forward to the days when young Alonso and young Verstappen duke it out, because you know Fernando's going to do that. Then there's Esteban Ocon, and this was probably one of the sharpest performances of the year, and it came at the best time possible. Sure, he's ultimately scored less points than Oliver Behrman did this year, but whilst Behrman fell at the ire of the stewards, Ocon just did what he needed to do. He got not too far behind Alonso, and he was able to hold off the likes of Hamilton in the works Ferrari. P7 today, not too bad. And his duel with Fernando was one of the more entertaining subplots whilst everyone else was looking at the top 3. Yeah, it wasn't enough to secure Haas 7th place in the Constructors, but he at least gave it a darn good show. His best result since Monaco as well, and the kind of benchmark you want to take into the off-season and to ease the pain of being humbled this year. Hey, he's going to be in the pound seat for all change next year. Haas will be coming TGR Haas, Toyota Gazoo Racing Haas Formula 1 team. That is serious supercharged customer team credentials, and he's going to be there for as long as that team wants him. Whereas Behrman, he'll have next year, but he's off to Ferrari in 2027, no doubt, for either replacing Hamilton and Leclerc. That's what's going to happen. But today, though, Ocon maximised the car. He absolutely nailed it. He was right up there, whereas Gasly was right at the back and completely scruffy. He'll be really happy about that. And another person that will actually be really happy about it is Nico Hülkenberg, because he once again scrambled with Gasly, but he lived to tell the tale, and he actually brought home a couple of points. And as I said in my live stream, at the end of the race, as we were all processing what happened at the front, we then saw that Nico Hülkenberg had gone from P18 to P9, and we were like, "Hey, Hülkenberg!" This seriously felt like a "this is for you, Gabi" situation sort of thing. Gabi couldn't score a point in Sauber's final race. Nico rose to the challenge and succeeded. Twofold. And his race was a sort of crafty veteran performance that tends to be underrated, and we didn't really notice until the final lap, but can you really blame us? He turned a soft tyre opening stint, and just like with Hamilton, was able to rise up the order. And then of course when Behrman and Stroll got pinged for their time penalties, he rose up the order again. So thusly, he had an equally impressive performance to the likes of Lewis. And this has been a really impressive season for Nico. We were expecting nothing. When he signed the deal to go to Sauber, we were all thinking, oh boy, good luck for him trying to score anything. Well, he's been able to score a fair few points this year, many burns from the stern, and finally get that elusive podium before the team becomes Audi. That is a huge weight off his mind. Yeah, Sauber ultimately finished P9, but considering where they were at the start of the year and what they had to suffer through the year before, the fact they were even in a chance of maybe getting P6, that is something they can be proud of. But yeah, I'm looking forward to when they become Audi and how I'm going to be maining them for next year. And I can't wait for you guys to come and join me at maybe looking at this now retrospective video regarding on what happened in 2025, or even before that, depending on what your fancy is. I'll see you over there.